What's up, Pitt fans? Welcome back to another Pitt mailbag here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. He is Chris Carter. I am Noah Hiles, and we are your Pitt beat reporters here at the PG. Once again, coming to you midweek to answer all of your Panther-related questions. Chris, as always, very eventful week in Oakland. Pitt goes on the road to beat Louisville, earns a dominant win over a struggling Cardinals team Wednesday, but then comes home to lose a very tough game against Florida State on Saturday. And that's actually where we'll start this mailbag chat with. Russ wants to know, was Pitt's loss to Florida State its worst of the season? And does it take them out of the NCAA tournament consideration? I'll let you start this one off.
I don't think yet it doesn't, but it gives a warning sign to a lot of people who were starting to believe. And this was why I was saying, people were talking about like, hey, why aren't they ranked? Why aren't they ranked? And it's like because people aren't so sure about them just yet. Pitt has to prove that they can be consistent for a while, and then losses like this to Florida State. And again, Jeff Cable made a point after the game to talk about Florida State is not the same bad team that started the season. They've gotten healthier, they're getting better, but that's still a game that Pitt needs to win. And absolutely, the Seminoles aren't that bad, but you as a Pitt basketball team, if you want to be a tournament team, you got to win games like that. They'll get a chance to beat them in Tallahassee later this season. They'll need to win. They'll need to win the rematch. But for right now, Noah, I think the biggest concern here that Russ has, if Pitt's going to make the tournament, these next three games. You got some tough ACC opponents. Wake Forest, same record as them. You get Miami, who's been, the team that everyone's been talking about the ACC for a while now, and then you get your rematch with North Carolina in Chapel Hill. In my opinion, honestly, I think they really do need to come away with two wins out of those three games, and then hit a strong stretch because they could win one game and then start beating the other ACC teams. But we've now seen them that this was a game that they flopped here and they missed an opportunity. If they're going to start missing other opportunities like that, they need to make sure they're knocking down the big games so that they can kind of build their resume to balance out some of these disappointing losses. They're not out of it yet, Noah, but they need to kind of buckle up and be the resilient group they've been a lot of times this season.
If I could compare this loss to a Pitt football loss, it would be Georgia Tech, where it was just an ugly loss at home that should have never happened. And as Georgia Tech showed that, after upsetting Pitt at home, that team actually ended up having a decent year compared to what many people thought it would be after it fired its head coach and everything. I think this Florida State team is going to finish strong. I wouldn't be shocked if it finished with a winning record in the ACC. But right now, I think Pitt's biggest thing on its resume, you could point to the Virginia win and the North Carolina win, even wins over NC State and Northwestern and teams like that who, yeah, they're having good years. But another very strong thing on its tournament resume was it was 7-0 against quad 3 and quad 4 teams, meaning it doesn't play down to inferior competition. It takes care of business when it has a bad team on its schedule. It just gets in, gets the win, and gets out. And we saw Pitt do that in its first two games of this easy 3-game stretch that we talked about, on the road against Georgia Tech, on the road against Louisville. This loss changes things, and it makes you really reevaluate things with Pitt, where it sits right now, and it puts a lot of pressure, like you said, on the Panthers for this next 3-game stretch against Wake Forest, who's another team on the bubble, and Miami and North Carolina, who I think are probably two of the top 3 teams in the ACC, top 4 if you want to include Clemson in there. So it's not easy, and I don't think they're out of it yet, but I think that they're right now in a position to quickly fall out of it and not get consideration if the losses continue. I agree. 2 wins in their next 3 would be huge. If they go 1-3, the rest of their schedule is very easy. But if they go 1-2, in their next 3 games, they're probably going to have to win out. They can't afford another loss against, even a team like a Virginia Tech or a Syracuse, these middle tier teams in the ACC. You have to beat them now. And you probably have to win 1 or 2 games in the ACC tournament as well. Whereas if Pitt would have just beat Florida State Saturday and went 2-1 in this next 3 games, it would have been sitting pretty. I mean, there was never, and we can actually transition into this next question here as I continue this point. If Pitt doesn't make the NCAA tournament this year, is this considered a failure considering the position that they were once in. And no, it's not. Like,
Yeah.
you got to think, like, Pitt was never a lock to make the tournament, even after it beat North Carolina and Virginia. I mean, the highest I've ever seen Pitt in any bracketology is like an 8 seed, which that's the bubble. Like, I mean, 9, 10, 11 are like the last teams getting in there. But if you're an 8 seed, you're not comfortable by any stretch. It's normally a team overplaying or outplaying its standards or playing down or beneath its standards. Normally that's who you see as an 8 and 9 come March. So Pitt was viewed at its best as a team that was kind of playing above its capabilities, and they were starting to see a little bit of respect as an 8 or a 9. But this was never a team that was viewed as a lock to make the NCAA tournament. I think some people maybe in this city thought so after we saw the building fill up for the first time in 5 years, after we saw, back-to-back wins at home over ranked opponents, after we saw them really not choke against inferior competition on the road. But Saturday, it was a reminder that, this isn't Duke. This isn't Virginia. This is still a team that's rebuilding from a horrible 5-year stretch of basketball. And bad losses are a possibility just as much as a great win is. And so, yeah, if Pitt misses the tournament, this is still a successful season. I think I will say that this team's a lock to make the NIT at this point, I think, unless if it just the bottom completely falls out and they finish with a losing record, which could happen.
That's where I would say this would be a failure. If they do finish with a losing record and they don't make the NIT and it's all that bad stuff, that to me would be a failure, because they position themselves now. They have space to mess up. They could lose to Wake Forest and Miami and North Carolina and still find a way to rebound and get yourself, because if you lose those 3 games, you're even in the conference, and then you're 13-10. But then, like you said, all you'd have to do at that point is to just kind of handle your business. You'd get Louisville at home to rebound. You get a rematch with Florida State. You get Boston College, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Syracuse at home there, and then Notre Dame. Those are all games that they should go through and win. That's 6 games or 7 games. They should win 5 or 6 of those.
They should win 6 of them easily. I think the biggest challenge there is Notre Dame on the road, because it's Bray's last home game.
It will be Bray's last home game, which, by the way, he challenged Jeff Capel to a game of course at halftime. That was actually pretty cool during our ACC Zoom with coaches on Monday. But point being, you can lose out those games and go and dominate that stretch and win the games that you're supposed to. But if they don't, it will be a huge missed opportunity. NIT, I think, is hey, you guys made a step up this year. You improved. A lot of people had this team finishing in the bottom of the ACC, never having a chance. This would be a step up, and that has to be acknowledged. If they do make the tournament, it is far above exceeding anything anyone thought. I was one of the few people in this city that thought that they could finish with a winning record in the first place. I didn't have them making the NCAA tournament. So no, missing it wouldn't be a failure. Disappointing, because with the start there's no doubt about that, but in no way is that a failure.
Yeah, I think just to round this up, I think it would be maybe not a failure, but it would certainly be disappointing come Selection Sunday if we knew for a fact Pitt was not going to make the tournament. Based upon what we've seen this team do really since returning home from Brooklyn, after it started, 1-3 on the year, since everything that we've seen, even in the low losses against a Vanderbilt or what we saw Saturday against Florida State, the team was still displaying signs of being a competent basketball club, right? So this is a bubble team. I think that it's fair to label it that. It's what everyone in the country who evaluates bracketology has deemed Pitt for the last month or so. And it's got to do everything it can to remain on the bubble. And even if it doesn't get in, if it's one of the first 4 out, I still think that's, it's disappointing that it didn't get in for some people, but it's still a major step to even be in the conversation. And if we get to Selection Sunday and, there's not even a watch party at Pitt, of guys hoping to hear that name called, that's going to be a little bit of a disappointing. It's not a failure, though. The only way, like you said, Chris, the only way this is a really failure is if they just bottom out, finish with a losing record, don't even get in the NIT, which, I mean, considering after this 3-game stretch, they don't really have a lot of hard games. They're probably going to be a favorite in every game they play in February, aside from the first and the first game, which is at UNC. And after that, they'll probably be a favorite in March for the game at Notre Dame, and maybe they'll be an underdog on the road at Miami, depending on how things play out after that. But still a lot of season to go. Things could go really bad, but they could also go well.
They could.
We'll move on now. Victor wants to know, what would you say are the chances both John Hughley and Dior Johnson are on the roster and playing for Pitt in games next season? Man, Chris?
Both of them, both of them, I give a little less than 50%. I just don't have a read on the Dior Johnson situation.
Right.
I think that John Hughley will be back and will be working, because I think that, with his suspension that he had this freshman year and how Jeff Capel and Pitt stuck by him in those times, I think that he's grateful for that, and I think that you see the mutual exchange of appreciation between him and the program giving him space to complete whatever his recovery and whatever things he needs to do this year. There's no banging on. Never once was there ever a hint of frustration from Capel or the team or the program about John going through whatever he's been going through that we aren't privy to. But all that being said, you get through that part there. I think John Hughley looks at that and says, I need to come back and prove that I can do this, because if he transfers somewhere, I'm not so sure who keeps him the center of their program right now. And if he comes back to Pitt, I think that he knows that he'd have a place, working with Fetty, working with, if they're able to keep guys like Jalen Lowe and Carl Harrington, maybe Blake Henson sticks around, there's weapons to work around, and it won't be like last year where it was really just him and Jamarius Burton just trying to carry the team week in and week out. Now, Dior Johnson's the interesting situation. Part of me thinks that because the team stuck by him as well there, he did get suspended, but they waited for the process to play out. They brought him back in. They said, you can redshirt the year. I could see Dior Johnson saying, you know what, I'm gonna stick it out here and prove it here, because also his situation won't exactly be enticing to too many other programs. But again, I don't know Dior as a person. I've barely spoken to the young man, so I could also see him just being like, you know what, I can make it anywhere. I can go somewhere else. So John Hughley, I feel strongly about that he'll be back with the program next year, barring, of course, an epic collapse where something bad happens and the team loses a lot of games and Jeff Capel's gone and then all of this blows up. But all that being said, I think John Hughley stays. Dior Johnson, no real read on if he wants to stay. If he does stay, though, I think that he'd have a chance to play with an interesting group of talented young guys that they're bringing in through the high school recruitment next year.
Yeah, I think Hughley, if Hughley doesn't play for Pitt, I think the chances are he might just not play college basketball compared to playing somewhere else. I just think that that's how much he appreciates, his team, the program, and Coach Capel. And, and I don't have any inside information. I'm sure, and that's not to say other teams would definitely love to take a flyer on John Hughley. Maybe not another ACC program, but there are 300 plus teams in the country. I'm sure one of them would love to have a former all ACC center on their roster next year. Mm-hmm. With that being said, I do think that, he's got a lot to figure out. But I agree with you. I expect Hughley to be back. Absolutely. Dior, it's just impossible to predict anything about Dior Johnson.
Yeah.
If you just look at his past at all, I mean, he's a kid who went to 10 different high schools in 4 years. And, with that type of history, it's different at the collegiate level. It's different with his situation and things that are connected to him now. And I think that him sticking around at Pitt would be a major sign of growth for someone who I think had a very, immature label attached to him. Someone who, maybe was viewed by many as someone who doesn't really stick it out at places. If he was, in my personal opinion, he definitely should stick around, considering everything that Pitt went through to keep him here. It would make sense for him to be here, but you can never predict what that guy's going to do. We've never had even a chance to talk to him since he's been on campus. So we don't know him really well at all. But going off his past, it's hard to make a judgment. I think it would be in his best interest to stay at Pitt, but what do I know? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he can go somewhere else and be a superstar, and people will forget he was even at at Pitt for a year. But I don't know. I if I had to put a percentage on it, I think 50 to, I'll even go a little higher. I think 60, because I will say from what I have noticed, I mean, Dior does seem to love his team, and his team seems to really enjoy him too. These guys, they had a say in if he was going to be brought back or not, and it seemed like they wanted him back. It seems like they are embracing him, and it seems like he loves the guys on the squad. Like he's on the bench for games cheering, and he just retweeted a video that I had a couple days ago of Greg Elliott in warmups, just talking about how goofy his teammates are. And so, a guy who would consider leaving after his specific situation, I don't know if he would show that type of love. But again, I don't know. It's hard to predict anything when it comes to Dior Johnson. We'll move over now to football. Tom wants to know, any whispers of, we got a Gavin Bartholomew question again, our first of 2023, Chris. Any whispers of Gavin Bartholomew transferring with how little he was used this past year? Another transfer a la Jordan Addison could happen. Tom, I'm going to start this off by saying I have not heard anything about Gavin Bartholomew looking to transfer. He seemed pretty thrilled when the team signed Dracovic. And while the Panthers did add a receiver in the transfer portal and return 2 starting receivers, I think the line of thinking that goes with bringing in a quarterback who truly understands how to run Cignetti's offense is that, hey, I will get the ball now. At least that's how I would view it if I were him. Because if you look at how Cignetti's offenses have run, anywhere else really, the tight end is a big part of it. And we've said it on this mailbag numerous times that, Cignetti made Doran Dickerson a lot of money. He made Nate Byam a lot of money. He's shown the ability to get tight ends involved in this offense, even at Pitt. And I think it was more a quarterback thing why he didn't get the opportunities last fall. I think with a quarterback, and it could be Veyer, it could be someone else as well. I think if you just get the quarterback who actually knows how to run that offense, you'll get those touches. So I would be willing to bet that Gavin Bartholomew is optimistic about giving another year a try.
Yeah, I think that's where Pitt's at with him right now. I haven't heard anything about him transferring. I know there was a lot of speculation about that, but I also think that a lot of the transfer notifications for guys that are of his caliber kind of have happened already. I
Right.
think that a lot of players, if they were going to move, they'd have done it right now. And that's not to say that something can't happen. But Gavin Bartholomew is a guy who was on ESPN for having the #1 play of the weekend when they played Tennessee. He's a guy that I think anybody who studies college football knows that he's one of those guys that could be a rising player this year. And I think that if he was going to make a move, it would have been made already. But like you said, Frank Cignetti is known for using his tight ends. Just ask Doran Dickerson about what he did for his career. Cignetti's time at Pitt basically got Doran Dickerson on the map and made him a college football prospect that turned into an NFL career for him. I think that that Bartholomew's going to look at the situation Pitt has, Dracovic joining the team, and think, hey, there's a chance here that I could be kind of the primary receiving threat for a team that just still likes to run the football. This could really work out for me, and that could turn him into a decent draft pick. So I think that he sticks around, and I think that Pitt, I think Pitt could still add another player in the transfer portal. We saw them add another player officially after we were kind of all talking about it. But yeah, I think Gavin's sticking around, and I think that Pitt's. I'm not sure if Pitt loses too many other guys in the portal that we don't already know about.
No, and if we're speaking honestly here, I think Gavin Bartholomew could be like a first or second team All ACC tight end in the preseason, just based upon like
Could
a
be.
lot of the top tight ends from the ACC are going to the NFL now. So he's one of the top returning guys. He's a freshman All-American, and I think that a lot of people. I wouldn't be shocked if Gavin Bartholomew led Pitt in touchdown receptions next year. I'll make that bold of a claim. Like I really do think that he could be a perfect weapon if used properly, and that goes into just having the right quarterback running the offense. Speaking of the passing game, Adam wants to know, with Dejon Reynolds committing to Pitt last week, is it fair to say the Panthers are figuring out a way to successfully improve their program through the transfer portal? Carter, you want to start it off?
Yeah, I mean they are. You're looking at all the guys that they're bringing in right now, and they just keep on coming. You look at You look at this, you look at Donovan McMillan, you look at Derek Davis, like all the guys that they've started to just bring in. It for a while, it just felt like a Whippeal reunion. We were just being like,
Right.
okay, they're just bringing back everybody that left.
Every 4-star who went to the SEC, they're just bringing them back.
Exactly, but but you're bringing in a guy like Derek Davis. You're bringing in now Dejon Reynolds, who everyone was talking about Dante Cephas, but Dejon Reynolds was always an interesting talent. A guy that's been a 4-star guy who could from Georgia, who could come in and play real good. Of course, you played at Florida, but
Hmm.
originally from Georgia. But you look at Donovan McMillan, you look at Phil Dracovic. I think that they're learning how to manage the situation, and I think a lot of this also is learning step by step how to do that. Because everyone kind of needed to kind of learn what the heck are we going to do with the state of the transfer portal. Transfer portal didn't used to be nearly this active, about 5 years ago. It was more so something that you kind of looked at, but now it's this complete much more open thing where you're bound to lose, more than a handful of players
Yeah.
every year, but then bound to gain more than a handful of players every year. And then it's just about, the guys that you lose, who do you get back in return as far as the prospect that they're doing? I think they're doing a fine job and they're learning how to do that. But also, Pat Narduzzi said this a lot to us, Noah. He believes in building through high school recruits, and that's what he wants to do. And I think that they still contain a lot of young guys that they have a lot of belief in coming up. And I think that if they're able to bank on those guys and season the roster with more of these transfer portal guys, it could become a good system that gets them a few teams that might overachieve the initial expectations if they're able to hit on one or two transfers who turn out to be really good and really great fits for the high schoolers that they've been bringing up.
I think if you look at the last 2 years, Chris, Pitt, you can make an argument Pitt has addressed its biggest area of immediate need through the transfer portal successfully.
Yeah.
I mean, last year, Pitt's biggest area of need in the offseason, I think, was at linebacker, and they went and they got one. They were losing 2 starters at linebacker, and they got Shane Simon from Notre Dame. That was a huge addition.
And Tyler Wiltz, I thought was
Yeah,
also.
and Tyler Wiltz. Yeah, that's another very good point. Yeah, they got 2 very productive linebackers with experience, and it allows a Bengali Kamara and a Solomon DeShields to get reps as well without having the weight of the world on their shoulders. And, you could obviously, their strongest position, what it was supposed to be this year, was receiver, took a hit with losing a guy in the transfer portal. But, they addressed quarterback was another area of need. And while they didn't get a guy who it played out well, they got one of the top quarterbacks on the transfer portal market last year in Keaton Slovis. Yeah. And again, didn't play out well, but there were a lot of teams who would have happily taken Keaton Slovis off of USC's hands. You look at this year, what were the biggest areas in need? Quarterback. They brought in 2 guys who are notable names. I mean, Veyer was someone who, before Penn State landed a 5-star, was kind of looked at as someone who would probably replace Clifford as Penn State's next guy up. But then, they landed Aller and it all changed. And Dracovic is a guy that the Pitt fans have wanted since he was playing at middle school at in Pine Richland. So they get 2 quarterbacks there, another area of need receiver. They get Dejon Reynolds right after Jared Wayne leaves. That's, I think, at the very least, a promising addition. You never know how receivers are going to pan out.
Right.
But then on the defensive side of the ball, they lose 2 multi-year starting safeties. They pick up Donovan McMillan, and you could use Derek Davis at safety. He's an athlete right now, so you could see him at running back. But you get 2 guys who were at one point in time 4-star safety recruits as well. And yeah, so they're clearly able to bring in dudes who can immediately come in and compete for starting positions through the transfer portal. And they're not just coming in and replacing returning starters who aren't good enough. They're coming in and filling immediate areas of need. And that's huge for a program like Pitt, where I think we've seen the Panthers have more depth under Narduzzi than they've had it under previous head coaches or regimes. But you can never have enough depth, as we saw from powerhouses like Georgia, where a guy goes down, they got another 4-star coming in. Well, Pitt's not going to be anywhere near that anytime soon. But if they can have one guy go down and replace him with a Tyler Wiltz, who has played a lot of football at the Division I level, and you have him thanks to the transfer portal, that's how you build a winning program. So yes, Adam, I do think that Pitt has showed the ability to make its team better both now and for the future, because some of these guys have multiple years of eligibility. like Vayer and Reynolds, you can make your team better now and for the future through the transfer portal. So that's all we got for today. Chris, any final thoughts as we wrap up another weekly mailbag?
No, I think that Pitt basketball, we get to see some more exciting times. I'm really intrigued to see, if Pitt fans show up for some of these bigger games. It wasn't the biggest crowd that we saw this past Saturday, but it was a lively zoo.
It was loud.
I'll say that. Like there were still some spaces in different spots, but the zoo was back and was loud. And I fully expect them to carry that for the game against Wake Forest and the game against Miami. Maybe this could be factors that give Pitt an advantage in their home environment to pull off a resilient bounce back and get two really big wins here that I think could change the trajectory of their season.
Honestly, I thought it was a pretty good crowd, but maybe Pitt should not have big crowds, because the last two crowds they've had against Clemson and Florida State were electric, and they lost both those games. So maybe you stay home. I'm sure the athletic department won't like me saying that, but hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Follow us on social media, and keep checking out our work at Post-Gazette.com. And keep coming back to YouTube. We'll have more Pitt mailbags for you each week. Take care.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to Post-Gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.